I'm so excited to introduce tonight's speakers. Author, playwright, poet, whatever the form, whether fiction or memoir, Deborah Levy's works are witty, original, and thought-provoking, with a skillful way of making every word count. The volumes may be slim, I know you've seen them as you came in, but the content is vast and weaves in and draws on references and inspiration from a pantheon of cultural figures, I know some of which will be discussed tonight, which you will see alluded to as well in the title to tonight's talk. With Deborah tonight is journalist and presenter Rosie Goldsmith, whose fashion and fiction series we've worked with a number of times, so some of you here may have seen her before, I hope. Rosie is a tireless champion of literary endeavors, and in addition, to presenting, writing on the subject, she's also just launched a podcast, The Words, which I hope some of you have heard. If not, available on iTunes, download now. But before, I know you're all very keen to hear from them both, so I'd like to invite first Rosie to the stage.
Welcome to Fashion and Fiction. Now we've been plotting this particular talk for quite a few months, and I was looking over the various titles we were thinking of calling it, because it took a while to come up with the title we've chosen, which is Divas, Delusions and Desire. But we went through fashion, death and desire, and then ego and alter ego was one of yours as well, and then fashion, freedom and flirtation, and then we've landed with divas, delusions and desires. Why do you think that is the title for your look at fashion and fiction?
Because all fashion in a way is a delusion and an illusion. And divas, I just love divas. I particularly love Aretha Franklin and Nina Simone. And in a way, my novel Hot Milk was sort of inspired by a story that Nina Simone I read about her, which is that when she first played, she was a classically trained pianist. And when she needed to make some money, when she was a young woman, she played in her first nightclub. And she always used to have a glass of milk on top of the piano, which I found so touching. And she was then told that she couldn't just play classical piano, she had to sing. And so she had to sort of find out what her voice sounded like, because she was classically trained, and invent her voice and experiment with her voice, and became the great diva in my view. And Aretha, I just loved the way she always comes on with a fur coat and slings her purse bag on top of the piano and sings in her coat, and then sometimes it slithers to the floor.
Now, you're not a diva at all. I know you're fascinated by them. I mean, you're one of the most, I've known Deborah now a while, and I must say you're one of the most modest people I know. But you are quite a flamboyant person. Now, if we talk about, I want to go straight in and talk about fashion, because I've got to tell you that every time you dress for this particular event, more than any other event I do think, what am I going to wear, in a way, to match what you may be talking about. Not exactly, not as creepy as that, but I know, for instance, I was going to wear yellow, and then I was ending, I don't know whether any of you have read this yet, but I was going to wear yellow, and I thought, oh my goodness, I can't possibly wear yellow, because there is this passage in Deborah's autobiography, the second part of her autobiography, which has just come out, called The Cost of Living, where yellow is an absolute no-no. And you are very sensitive to colour and costume and the masquerade, if you like, yet you nearly always wear black.
Well, Rosie, I thought the only way to go for this evening was to dress down. I mean, I tell you one thing that an amazing sculptor and performance artist called Brian Caitling told me once. I think he's also become a novelist. I went to see a performance that he gave in the British Museum, and he was working with the Oedipus myth. And what he did was he was wearing a suit, and he got 2 inkwells that were full of ink and splashed them into his eyes so that it looked as if he was weeping ink and that his eyes had been gouged out as Oedipus had to his own eyes. And afterwards I said, I really love your formal suit, Brian. And he said, I'll give you some advice, Deborah. If you're going to explore the more radical dimensions of human consciousness, always wear a pinstripes jacket. And I think that's excellent advice. I mean, really good. And then the other one is James Joyce. When his portrait was being painted, he said, never mind the soul, get the tie right.
I mean,
and that's sort of how I feel when I write characters too, in a way.
So wearing black, I mean, the interesting thing about that absolutely amazing photograph of you in red, which is so unusual. I don't think I've ever seen you wear red, but that photograph is of you in red. Do you like yourself in red?
Sure.
But I've only ever seen you wear black.
Not true.
You do like colours. Now, if we go, I know that you are absolutely fascinated by clothes yourself, and you know they've defined you as they have many teenagers and young people growing up. But you particularly struck out, I think. Let's go back to West Finchley. You were age 13, and David Bowie, or Bowie, as you're calling him, I think, sort of entered your bedroom and changed your life to a certain degree.
He didn't enter my bedroom. He entered my living room.
He entered your living room?
Yeah.
So you didn't have a poster up in your bedroom?
No, we didn't have posters. Some people say Bowie and some people say Bowie. I think my generation say Bowie, although Paul Morley, who is the expert on Bowie, says no, it's Bowie, and it rhymes with Zoe, which was his son's name before he changed it to Duncan.
It's true, actually, isn't it?
So yes, Bowie blew my mind when I was 13, but I have to give you the sort of atmosphere because, so there was Thursday night and there was Top of the Pops, and there'd be my older brother who was, so I was 13, he was 19, and the fashion then for the guys was these sort of Che Guevara khaki hats, big khaki coats, beards, long hair, big heavy boots, and it was my job to hoover the carpet before my mother got home from work. And my brother in his Che Guevara hat used to just lift up his legs for me to hoover under them. And I remember having Hoover rage in the suburbs of West Finchley, and Top of the Pops was on, and there was Bowie, who couldn't have been more opposite in every single part of his own construction of masculinity than my most beloved brother, I have to say, although it didn't feel like that day. And so they're crisps on the carpet, and I haven't hoovered them. Everything stops. Mum's about to get back from work in 10 minutes. And there was the Starman, with his hair the color of a blood orange, the sexualized alien who was going to fly me away from the suburbs of West Finchley and my vile earthly life to a glamorous world, freakish world somewhere else. And so even those lines, you know, if we can sparkle, you'll land tonight.
There's from Space Oddity, and this I took up from one of your books. She's so swishy in her satin and tat, in her frock coat and bippity boppity hat.
Just to go back to the Starman, I honestly, you know, when you're 13, it's odd to think in a way, Rosie, how childish, I was going to say we were, but maybe I was. Because I really did sort of think a spaceship might land on the daffodils outside my window, and I would sparkle and the starman would fly me away. And then those lines, let the children boogie.
All right.
He'd like to come and meet us, but he thinks he'll blow our minds. And I just think, yeah, that's exactly what I want. I want you to blow my mind.
So you didn't go, I mean, at the same time as Bowie, of course, you had David Cassidy and the Osmond Brothers, and you didn't go that route. You went the Bowie route. Or do you think you could be both? Were you both?
No, I wasn't. There was Alice Cooper, and he wasn't for me either.
Alice
there was
Cooper.
Mark Bolan.
And Mark
I
Bolan,
mean, the
yes.
whole glam rock thing that went on for some time. I did like Life's a Gas, and I liked that little wobble that Bolan used to do on gas. But the thing about Bolan was he was quite a nervous performer, and he was a bit Americanized, whereas Bowie was completely South London. We could show that.
Yes,
Top
I mean,
of
the
Pops.
thing about, did you actually dress like that then? Did you, is that how far you took it? Did you try to be like Bowie?
Oh, this one. No. If we show the top of the Pops
do that one.
But later, all the boys at school used to wear Rimmel frosted blue eyeshadow, which was really interesting because Martin Amos's novels were coming out at that time. This was the antithesis to his male characters. So Bowie opened up an imaginative space that was inside us anyway. And we were hospitable to his freakishness because we wanted to express our freakishness. And so all those rigid boundaries of femininity and masculinity, he messed all that up. And we could mess it up too.
You were very, I mean, with 13 to discover that at the age of 13.
14, 15.
The title of this talk is actually Bowie to Freud. Now, I can't remember Freud writing or being directly involved in fashion. His great-granddaughter, Bella Freud, is a fashion designer. That's about all I can think of. But if we're talking about identity, which is what it is, and the masquerade of self, which is something you write about as well, I mean, that's definitely Freud, isn't it?
Yeah, because I guess Freud was interested in what writers are interested in, which is the parts of ourselves we conceal and reveal, and how we construct ourselves, and how we lie to ourselves, and all the rest of it.
And there is, I mean, when, on that theme as well, and particularly in The Cost of Living, there's so much to read about that particular theme of identity. And you quote Marguerite Duras as well quite often, in fact, or you refer to her quite often as being very influential for you. And she spoke very much about the real and the unreal, or wrote about the real and the unreal self, is how that when we see ourselves, we don't see ourselves, people see us, how we're seen differently by people from our own image of ourselves and so on, and how clothing can transform us completely.
Well, I start with a quote from Marguerite Duras in The Cost of Living, and Duras writes, "We're always much more unreal to ourselves than other people are." Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're always more real.
Yeah.
You're always more unreal to yourself than other people are.
Yeah. So then the thing about fashion is sometimes we just want to be more. Sometimes we dress in a way that just makes us more unreal to ourselves. I mean, we're just enjoying a kind of alter ego, if you like, or we're just making up something that might even be braver.
But do you think you were, in that sense, I mean, you've written about writing as being a kind of performance as well, but do you think that from an early age you were performing because you were dressing up in quite unusual clothes from quite an early age?
I don't think I was really performing. So I was born in South Africa, and we came to Britain when I was 9. And I didn't know who the Beatles were. Can you imagine that in the school playground? And I spoke with this funny accent, and there was no television in South Africa either. So I hadn't grown up with programs that the kids in my class grew up with. Watch with Mother and the Magic Roundabout and all that. And at my first secondary school, which was called St. Saviour's and St. Olaf's Grammar School for Girls, it was in the Elephant and Castle, and it was right near the Peak Friens factory, so you could smell the sweet sugar and cinnamon and as we walked to school. I remember that. And there was a strict school uniform policy, and I was sent, I didn't have a school regulation coat, and my mother sent my father out with me to buy one. And because dads can be a bit of a soft touch, I knew that he was more, he thought the weather in Britain was treacherous. You say there's treacherous weather. And he was just keen that we all wore vests and were warm. And so I managed to persuade him.
Are you talking Liberty bodices? Because that was the kind of vest we had to wear.
Oh, I don't remember those. But I saw a coat that all my school friends called my Yogi Bear coat, which was brown poodle fur sleeve with an orange suede collar and blue buttons. And I managed to persuade him to buy it for me from my school regulation coat. And I hung it in December in the cloakroom, and it disappeared. It wasn't there when I had to collect it in the after school. So I went home without a coat and came to school without a coat. And then, in assembly, the headmistress, who was called Miss Mercer Wilson, and she was formidable, and we were all terrified of her. There used to be a sort of aisle, and she would have her black academic cape on, and we would all stand as she came in and walked to the stage, and over her arm she had my Yogi Bear coat. And that was how I really made deep friends with those girls, because everybody knew I was in such trouble. And as she walked up the aisle and we all stood up, everyone was going, and I remember one English teacher who all the staff had to sit at the end of the line, and I liked her a lot. She was quite bohemian, and she wore kind of green velvet jackets and silk scarves and things like that, and she was very encouraging to me. And I remember her looking very concerned as it became clear that it was my coat. And Miss Mercer Wilson put it to one side, and we had to sing our hymns and all the school business. And at the end of the assembly, she said, could the owner of this monstrosity come to my office immediately after assembly, which I had to do. And I remember my knees actually shaking, and she pointed to the Peak Friens factory, and she asked me, did I want to work there? Did I have no ambitions for myself? The thing was, because I hadn't been brought up in England, I hadn't been brought up with the same kind of rooting in class as anyone else. And some of my friends' mums worked in the Peak Friens factory, and they were amazing women. They were lovely. We used to go there sometimes after school, and the mums would come down and give us bags of broken biscuits. So I was trying to figure out what she was on about, and then I got, I had to stay behind after school and write lines about my Yogi Bear coat, about how it would never happen again. And then my friend Kay met me on the 63, or on some bus, the day after, the next morning with her spare coat. And this is how lovely girls are. She was actually sewing on buttons that had come loose so that I could present this coat to Miss Mercer Wilson the next day. So what that was I think, sort of trying out something exuberant in me. Like it was a risk. But
it worked.
It's hard to, it wasn't like I was a rebel. I was actually very studious. But it was just like the first expression of something that I could make mine.
But was it also, and if we all think back to our childhood, at what point did we become ourselves? That's one of the issues. And I think
we never become ourselves.
We never become ourselves, maybe. But there is, I grew up in a big family, and I'm the only one in my family who's vaguely interested in clothes. And my family's absolutely appalled by the way I dress. And at a very early age, I was wearing yellow bell-bottoms and platform shoes. And I don't know, and I went to a comprehensive school. I grew up in a very, very normal teacher's family. We also grew up in South Africa, strangely. Strange that we have that in common. And I think this idea of the classless, not knowing exactly how to read all the rules, or even to read all the rules that everybody else had grown up with, and not knowing what Blue Peter was and things like that. That was it throws you a bit, but it actually frees you up as well, I think. And I wonder whether, in that sense, also it frees you up as a writer too, because you don't have to write the middle-class English novel, set in London, in Hampstead in London. You're free to write a European novel, which starts off talking about a glass of milk, or
yeah,
because I do think of you very much as a European international writer. But you happen to be British, so which is a great compliment, by the way.
I think the other thing to say about fashion, just to make it less literal, is that when I write a character, you can dress a character in thought and in subjectivity. So it's not just really what they wear. For example, in The Cost of Living, as I've toured around a bit with it, readers tell me that the character that they love the most is a man called the Man Who Cried at the Funeral. Yeah. And so I was looking at that with this evening in mind, and I don't describe a single thing he wears. I don't even describe what he looks like. This actually surprised me. So he comes across in tone, in speech, in mood, and you can tell that he's gentle and kind and thoughtful and a little bit camp, and he listens. But not once is there a reference to what he wears, quite unlike in Hot Milk. And so you can kind of create a character without reference, apparently, without reference to what they look like and what they wear.
In The Cost of Living, there are some wonderful moments when, for instance, and this is about you, I suppose, if that person you are writing about in your autobiography is you, or partly you, where you're wearing pearls on your bicycle, or you wear pearls in your shed to write, and this is always picked up on by other people. The lady who rents you your shed to write, sort of refers to it all the time. Oh, she wears pearls when she's writing one. And then, of course, the pearls break, and you wear pearls when you're swimming as well. I'm not to say this is eccentric, but it is unusual.
Sea pearls.
Sea pearls.
Because sea pearls pick up the temperature of your body, so they become a bit like a second skin. There's an amazing opening to Colette's novel, Chérie. So what I love about these photographs is that I like the way she's inventing herself for the camera, and I like the way that that she presents herself as a woman with a purpose in life. Her literary purpose is that it's not really smiling, you know. But in her novel Chérie, because you were mentioning pearls, it starts with two lovers, an older woman, Leah, and her younger lover, Chérie. And he says, "Give me your pearls, Lee. They look just as good on me as they do on you." And she thinks, yes, they do, actually. And they look better on him because he's young and handsome and muscular, and he wants them. Anyway, I do refer to pearls in the book, and an elderly, wonderful woman rents me a shed at a difficult time in my life to write. And the thing about my shed is that I can't really write. I do sort of, it's not that I dress up to write, but I couldn't really write in pajamas or my nightdress or something like that, because the words sort of go to sleep and start sort of yawning. So I do like to...
You get dressed?
So I just do like quite a formal, I do, you know, it's not like a dress out, but no, I don't sort of can't really write in sloppy stuff. I don't know why. But my landlady, because I write in a dusty shed, she goes, I don't know why she wears pearls to write in that dark, dusty shed anyway. And I do write quite a lot about how difficult it is to be writing in a shed, say, for 4 hours and then go to a meeting, an important meeting, and there's a description of going to a film meeting about possibly optioning one of my novels, and discovering that I'd sat through it with 3 leaves in my hair from where I'd had to duck out of duck under the apple tree.
Because your bike had broken down or something. You had to fix your bike just before the meeting.
I did. I had bicycle oil all over my hands. I'd had to run into a kind of noodle bar, which had no mirror in the bathroom and no hot water, and I had 3 leaves, muddy leaves in my hair. And I sat through this meeting trying to get my book optioned. No one said anything.
Can you believe it? Now, we've already talked about a couple of the people who
could I just go say a bit more about Colette?
Yes, talk about
So Colette, the books that I really love are the Claudine books. I don't know if you know them. Claudine at School, Claudine in Paris, Claudine Married. And
it's funny you mention those, because those were, nobody reads them now.
Yeah.
I remember them really well.
And then she writes about her music hall days when she divorces her scoundrel of a husband, who was called Willie, who actually signed her books, those Claudine books, with his name. Took her a while to sort that out. She wrote a book called The Vagabond, which is about her music hall days. And she also sometimes wore a tuxedo. She had love affairs with men and with women. She had introduced me to her Burgundy childhood, where she had a long plait almost to her ankles, which she cut off into this bob after she was married and touring. And then that photograph there, which I saw when I was about 15, 16, of her sitting at her desk with her cat, I thought, oh, she's a writer who looks like a movie star. I want to look like her. And I want to sit in an
Did you want to be a writer at the age of 15?
Yeah.
And and look like a movie star?
And I want a cat like that. And you know, she sort of bathed. She seemed like a glamorous European writer with this arc of French light coming in and her flowers. And I thought, that looks all right to me.
And you've achieved some of that. But let's talk about some of the other people who've influenced you, because it always strikes me that you're so well read, and which is wonderful. It's like walking into, you know, the European Enlightenment, a modern day Enlightenment, when I read any of your novels. And this, The Cost of Living, is very much like that too, because you're often referring to people, particularly women, but many men as well, who've influenced you. And I wonder why some of them have. I mean, Marguerite Duras, possibly quite obvious in many ways, but and Simone de Beauvoir, you were working through the second sex, I suppose, through that particular. Do you want to talk about a couple of the, or did you want to read?
So the Cost of Living is a kind of conversation with Simone de Beauvoir's book, The Second Sex. And I'll just read you the blurb on the cover. So this is the narrator, who is myself speaking. To separate from love is to live a risk-free life. What's the point of that sort of life? I was living in the republic of writing and children. I was not Simone de Beauvoir after all. No, I had got off the train at a different stop, marriage, and stepped on to a different platform, children. She was my muse, but I was certainly not hers. Yet, we had bought a ticket for the same train. The destination was to head towards a freer life. That is a vague destination. No one knows what it looks like when we get there. It is a journey without end, but I did not know that then. So that's the kind of conversation that I'm having with de Beauvoir. And in terms of fashion, I always thought her chignon was amazing. And but I think she used quite a lot of pins and hairspray, and I only used one pin and no hairspray. Yeah.
Right, there she is, looking quite severe. I always thought she looked quite severe. But the interesting thing, I know we're going to have I'm looking forward to the reading from Cost of Living at the end, but the point about all these different people and all these different influences, it's very clear in the autobiography, because you refer directly to them and you weave them in. And it is the most exquisite book. I mean, I love all your books and know all your books now, but this is just a revelation to me, because it's like reading an epic poem. It's just wonderful. If you've read it, you'll know already. And in fact, in spite of the fact of mentioning all these people and all these influences...
James Baldwin.
And James Baldwin. Barbara Hepworth.
Barbara Hepworth, Louise Bourgeois.
It's absolutely rich with all these names and people in this very slim volume. But it's how you refer to them. It's sort of almost gliding over them and how they've become seamlessly part of your life in a way. And when you look at the novels, they're there, but without you mentioning them, of course. And that's the great art. And it's wonderful to be able to read the autobiography and then the novels and go backwards and forwards. But they're all part of one great work, I think. Now we're going to read. You've got a few extracts you're going to read, and we're going to talk about Hot Milk particularly as dripping with, I think we call it erotic fashion, or at least fashion features quite large in that. Did you want to read an extract from that?
I mean, just to say something else about these photos of Simone de Beauvoir and then Colette before, I feel that they sort of, they're kind of loaning themselves to the photographer for you know, however long it takes to take a photograph. You notice that they're women of a certain generation. They're refusing to smile, and why I like them is that they are their own subject. Here you say she looks very severe. Maybe, but I think she has to be. She had to be a bit severe and not smile and do jazz hands for the camera, a woman of her generation. She's just saying, no, I have a purpose in life. I do not want to construct myself in any other way than this. And that's why I really love that photograph. And those of Colette's, which are more playful. Hot Milk, yeah. Has anyone read Hot Milk? Yeah.
So, this is one of the two Booker shortlisted books. This is the most
Okay.
recent one, isn't it?
So I'm going to read an extract from the part where Sophia, who is 26, she's half Greek, half British, but she's born in Britain. Her father is Greek, but she didn't know him very well because he left the family home when she was young. So she has a surname, Papastergiades, that everyone asks her to spell and to pronounce. She's got an identity that she can't quite carry because she's born here. And she doesn't know the Greek side of her family. And she's in Almeria with her hypochondriac, possibly, mother, to find a cure for her mother's limb paralysis. And one day she goes into the local cafe, and when she's in the loo, there's a gap underneath the wall, and she thinks a man is standing in the next cubicle because they're men's shoes. And she flies out and asks the waiter she says, there's a man in the cubicle. And it turns out to be a woman wearing these shoes, and it's Ingrid Bauer, who's kind of based on the goddess Athena and Lee Miller. And it's Sophia speaking. The woman in the men's shoes is standing by my table, straight and tall, like a soldier girl looking out to sea, at the boats, at the children swimming in giant plastic rings, at the tourists who have laid out umbrellas and chairs and towels on the sand. The diving school boat is now loaded with all its equipment and pulls away into the ocean. The brown Alsatian, who I have not yet freed, is still rattling its chains on the balcony. My name is Ingrid Bauer, she says. What is she doing, standing so close to me? I am Sophie, but Sophia is my Greek name. How do you do, Sophie? The way she says my name is like a whole other life. I'm ashamed of my sad white flip-flops. They have turned grey in the summer. Your lips are splitting from the sun, she says. Pablo's dog starts to howl. Ingrid looks up at the diving school roof terrace. That German shepherd is a working dog and should not be chained up all day. He belongs to Pablo, I say. Everybody hates him. I know, Sophie. I live here. I'm going to free that dog today. Oh, Sophie, how are you going to do that? I don't know. Ingrid looks up at the sky. Will you make eye contact with him when you undo the chains? Yes. Wrong. Never do that. Will you make your body still like a tree when you approach him? A tree is never still. Like a log, then. Yes, I will be still like a log. Like a leaf. A leaf is never still. She was still looking at the sky. There is a problem, Sophie. Pablo's dog has been badly treated. He will not know what to do with his freedom. The dog will run through the village and eat all the babies. If you are going to unchain him, You will have to take him to the mountains and let him run wild. In that way, he will be truly free. But he'll die in the mountains without water. Now she was looking at me. What is worse, Sophie? To be chained all day with a bowl of water, or to be free and die of thirst?
Bravo. When you look back over your novels, do you think that it's not so much, to use that term, fashion, I mean, it's clothing and so on, you're interested in all this, it's all very sensual, all the senses really, because in every single book you write, there is this very sensual feeling. You can smell, you can taste, you can touch, you can see. And I know that art has been a very formative influence, and you've been very involved in arts generally. And that's what's so wonderful about it. You bring it all into these novels. But do you think that clothing as such is not particularly interesting to you? Because you described the your character in the man who cried at funerals. I think that's what you called him. As you say, not as a physical dressed object, but
I think
and he's a man
changes.
as well. Whereas women, you do perhaps describe more with clothing.
Yes, and in The Cost of Living, there is the man in the male best friend in his yellow jacket. No, in Hot Milk, Ingrid Bauer wears strappy silver gladiator sandals that lace up to her knees.
Those,
Because I'm also thinking about the goddess Athena, who was the goddess of war and wisdom and geometry and all the rest of it. And so I researched the kind of sandals that she might wear, and which I happen to love too, so that the higher up you were in the Roman army, the higher your sandals were. And I have her in silver shorts and silver sandals and silver nail varnish. So she is very constructed, and she rides a horse across the beach, and she nearly runs down Sophia on her horse. And so clothes for Ingrid Bauer are there to give her a sort of Amazonian strength, and she's pretty cool, and she's dressing to elicit desire from Sophia, who's shabbier. So it's to give her some status and to torment Sophia. Sophia wants Ingrid Bauer. She wants her respect, and she's a bit in love with her, and she's confused by her. So that's how clothes are used there.
Because I mean, you were saying, you were alluding at the beginning, perhaps to the fact that you didn't think they were that important. But I maybe it's because I do pick these things up when I read anyway, because I'm interested.
Yes, it's not. It's not. It changes for every book, for every character. So they're there to do something. You know, clothes are
serve a purpose. Well, what about the blue dress, for instance, in Vienna? There's a short story in Black Vodka, Vienna, where there's this blue dress is absolutely worn. I can't remember the name of the character, but this blue dress is one dress she has, and she wears sword with, and that's a very strong image again, a really important sense of identity comes through that
That's
dress.
Right. And so in a short story called Vienna in my collection, Black Vodka, there is a woman called Maigret, and she's seducing a man who is haunted and tormented by the image of his children who he's missing. And the blue dress is to give her a sort of regal coldness. I'll read a bit of that.
Because it is actually, it's about fashion, the opposite in a way. It's about how cold it can be as well, and alienating.
It's a cultural coldness that I wanted, like he's warmer than her. So I flip those gender stereotypes a lot, where the women are supposed to be sort of warm and kind and good at listening and all the rest of it. Sometimes the women are harsher and the men are more vulnerable. So it's called Vienna, and he just can't get over her, actually. This is what he says about her. She is Middle Europe, he thinks. She is Vienna. She is Austria. She is a silver teaspoon. She is cream. She is schnapps. She is strudel dusted with white icing sugar. She is the sound of polite applause. She is a chandelier, a velvet curtain. She is made from the horn of deer found deep in the pine forests of Middle Europe. She is spun from money. She smells of burnt sugar. She is snow. She is fur. She is leather. She is gold. She is someone else's property. He holds out his arms, inviting her back to her own bed, inviting Middle Europe to share her wealth, to let him steal some of her silver, to let him make footprints across her snow and drink her schnapps.
Pure poetry. It's wonderful, really wonderful. Now we're coming towards the end of our little bit, and then we'll have some questions from you as well. But I sort of want to try to get to a little bit more of the heart of this idea of to what extent you think clothing and, if you like, the whole paraphernalia that we wear and use as our masks or whatever, whether you think, to what extent you think it's important. But you do write quite a lot about it in Cost of Living. And what's so relevant for me is, and I think several other people who've read it will find that in this Me Too period that we're going through, and hopefully will continue to go through because it's a lot to come out, this book is so relevant. And that's, I think, probably why it moved me so much, because it is about contemporary feminism, really, where you eschew the kind of lipstick feminism, which we've had for so long, if you like, which is, again, the mask that we've had to wear as women, I think. Were you conscious of this when you were writing this book, which is about the cost of being a woman, really? Were you conscious of writing a kind of manifesto in a way? You were. So it was a conscious act on your part.
I mean, I have to say, I do like lipstick. So it is a yes, but...
I like being a lipstick feminist, but it's actually become
I don't,
slightly denigrated.
I don't knock any sort of feminisms, but in this book, it is true that it is quite fierce and radical, and it is also quite a gentle and loving book. But it is a book that refuses to be silent. And the thing that Rebecca Solnit, in her amazing book, The Mother of All Questions, points out is that what the patriarchy needs to do is to the most violent thing the patriarchy does is to silence women. And that has stopped. That's not stopped, but it's highlighted at this time. I had absolutely no idea when I was writing it whether it would be of any interest to anyone else. But it felt very political to document a particular time in my life and the everyday of it, and to see what happens.
Without judgment, and so, which is again what you achieved so beautifully, because what happens is your marriage breaks up and your mother dies also within a year, which are huge events in anybody's life, but it's how you work it out.
It's about the politics and poetics of making a new life. And shall I read a bit?
Yes, and you're going to read the Nightdress
Yes.
passage. Excellent. Well, this will be our last reading, which is absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, Rosie. When I wasn't writing and teaching and unpacking boxes, my attention was on mending the blocked pipes under the basin in the bathroom. This involved unscrewing all the parts, placing a bucket under the pipes, and not knowing what to do next. I had borrowed a mysterious machine from the cardiologist who lived downstairs. It was like a Hoover, except it had wires which were inserted into the tube. It was early morning, and I was wearing what is sometimes called a French postman's jacket over my nightdress. It was not a deliberate decision to wear a blue postman's jacket for a plumbing job, not at all. It just happened to be hanging on the hook in the bathroom, and it kept me warm. The clash between the thick utilitarian cotton of the jacket and the flimsy nightdress seemed to sum up everything for me, but I was not sure what the final sum equaled. Now that I was no longer married to society, I was transitioning into something or someone else. What or who could that be? How could I describe this odd feeling of dissolving and recomposing? Words have to open the mind. When words close the mind, we can be sure that someone or something has been reduced to nothingness. To amuse myself, there was no one else around, I began to think about the genre of the female nightdress in relation to plumbing. The one I was wearing was black silk, and I suppose was quite sensual in a generic way. I could promenade in it, and I could masquerade in it, given that femininity was a masquerade anyway. I could see that black silk was a classic in the female nightwear genre. To add to the mix, I was also wearing what my daughters call my shaman slippers. They were black suede ankle boots trimmed with abundant, queasily realistic fake furs, one of which hung like a small tail whipping my ankles as I walked around the flat looking for a gadget called a master plunger. The slippers were a gift from my best male friend, who thought I needed some insulation, as he put it, which might be a plumbing term for covering up something that is exposed and raw. I appreciated the fur boots with their comforting warmth and magical properties. I suppose my fantasy was that I'd skinned the animals myself. And the postman's jacket seemed to be a counterpoint to the black silk nightdress. I was the man, I was the woman.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much to Deborah Levy. It's always a pleasure. It's always a creative process actually just talking to you. It's a joy. Thank you so much. Very precious.